Hey everybody, it's me again. I wanted to make a really small video today, but I will probably ramble a lot again. But I wanted to make a video for a viewer of mine. His name is Steve, and he asked me probably 3 weeks ago a question, and I wanted to get to it, answer the question that he had because it was really interesting. I didn't want to just write him back, but I wanted to make a video because yeah, I hadn't made a video in a while at that time, and I mean, it's about time that I made a few videos, yeah. And the question was interesting, and I think the answer was pretty interesting. It was about reading, and because I think reading is the most effective way in comparison to speaking, writing, and listening in order to improve one's current skills in a language. I know that it worked for me. Everything The other three things, speaking, writing, and listening, are important, and depending on the language that one is learning, I think, like if someone is learning Chinese, then writing is much, much, much more important than in German. I learned German and I learned French, and writing is, writing is very important. So, but I think reading is crucial at all levels, and I will talk about that and how it's beneficial. I told Steve that it's obvious that when one reads, one increases his or her vocabulary at all levels, at the beginner's level, intermediate level, and advanced level. Um, I mean, anybody can do this. Anybody can do this, even in their own language. I don't read in English. I usually read in German, and I like reading poetry. I have a book from a really good friend of mine, or I actually have two books, but I'll show you one of them. Hess, or yeah, it's from my favorite poet, Hermann Hesse, and this is from my really, really good friend Sabine, and thank you very much for that. Um, and when I read him, his German or his German's really good, really old fashioned. He wrote a lot of books, poems, and the like in the late 1800s, early 19th or early 20th century, and he's helped me a lot. But most of the words that he uses are all old fashioned, and but I still enjoy increasing my vocabulary in this way. Who knows? I mean, maybe I can use the words eventually. I just love, getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the language, the German language, and never stopping, because I think that's an important thing also as I ramble on, that I think the learning process should never stop if one truly wants to increase in the language. But that depends on the goals. But with my German and my French, I really want to be pretty good. So I have to read a lot. And so I guess I'll get to other things other than the vocabulary. In German, there are four cases, and there are three genders. There are masculine, feminine, and neuter nouns. And one problem that a lot of people have in German, I think most all learners of German have this at one point or another, is that they flip the words, or they don't flip the words. They say, instead of for example, instead of saying Diamant, they would say Demon, feminine, or Dosman, um, neuter. And they asked me, oh, how do you do that? Well, I think that when I read, it just you just happen to see how something is in the case, and then gender. You just happen to see the hitting two birds with one stone, so to say, enjoying what you are reading, and at the same time um, learning how something is if it's masculine, feminine, neuter, etc. Um, and not just one time, but I think one has to repeatedly encounter the word or words or expressions or verbs, anything like that. And eventually it just clicks, and then one says to himself or herself, okay, um, Diamant, that's right. And if they hear something like Die Mann or Das Frau, then that's it just sounds wrong. It's like, I don't know how to do it. It's like saying a apple or something. It just doesn't sound right. And I think that we get that some things through listening, but a lot of things through reading, especially if the word is more specific, or not more specific, but more difficult and not as common. Then it gets tricky sometimes. And also with verbs, verbs are really important while reading. You see a lot of verbs. They're, you know, part of the sentence, part of every full sentence as our nouns and everything else. Um, in German, sometimes people don't know there's a helping verb in the perfect tense, and there are two. There's haben, and sein. And sometimes people don't know which one to use, and I think with reading, it just helps us. It just, okay, that I know that this word goes with that word, and this one goes with that word, and it just makes the whole process easier, or more easy. And yeah, I wrote a few things down, so I keep looking over. I'm sorry. Um, there's also idiomatic expressions that are very important. I don't think it's very important to learn them at a beginner's level. I mean, if you want to, then sure, why not? Um, but a lot of a lot of books, magazines, and the like, they have a lot of expressions in them that people just happen to stumble over. I said before, to hit two birds with one stone. If somebody doesn't read too much, then maybe he or she didn't know that expression in English if he or she is learning English. Or maybe the person knows that expression because of reading, or maybe they just happen to hear it, um, and understand it now. But idioms, I think, are very important in a language in order to get deeper, to not take everything literally, because idioms exist in every language, and reading makes one more aware of that. Also, there are other parts of grammar that are not covered too much in grammar books, textbooks, and whatnot, because they're just too small and people don't really think about all the aspects of grammar. Um, and I guess learning grammar in grammar books, it's a tedious process. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think with reading, it's more natural, and it just you just understand it passively, and then you can make it part of your active, make it active by just stumbling over it and then keeping it in your head and then using it. So that's how it helps with, well, obviously it helps with writing because you see it and then, okay, you know how to write it, and paying attention to the punctuation. I guess punctuation is a different story, and then how something is spelled, if it's written uppercase or lowercase, etc. Um, when I read something, for example, I stumble on a word that I don't know, then I want to understand that word. Of course, doesn't matter uh, how not important this word is. I think all words are important, and if I want to know something, then I'll just look it up, and then, so that's the reading part. I read it and I write it down. I find the definition and I write it down. In this book, or this notebook, and I just have, right now I probably have a few thousand entries from since I started it maybe last year, early last year, maybe April. And so I write it down and I practice writing. Well, I only write it down once, but in this book, in this notebook, but I write it down. If I'm talking to somebody, then I obviously write the word down sometimes if I need the word. And also when I study these words so that I can ingrain them in my head, because when I when I just write the word down once, if I just write it once, then I might just forget it. If I don't write it down at all, then it's just me. If I don't write it down at all, then I'll probably forget it. But if I hear it again, then I'll definitely. That's another good part of reading, because you read it and I don't know. Has this answer me this if this has happened to you? You read a word and maybe it's a new word, and maybe it's not a common word, maybe it is a common word, but I like it when it's not too common of a word, and you see it in a book, and then you hear this word. You just hear this word all the time from that day forward, and it's like, oh, okay, your ears are more in tune to the word. That helps with listening, and the more you read, you can kind of sound out the words, um, and then when you're listening and increasing your skill in the language, I think obviously at first, the foreign language you're learning is just a bunch of sounds and melodies and the like. But the more you read, the more words come out of these sounds, and then sentences come out of these words, and thoughts, etc. And I think that's basically mostly because of reading. Um, I think reading is really good. There's people in every language who are well read, and the more reading, the better. There are people who don't read in their own language, and they don't learn other languages either, but they speak the language fine, but their vocabulary is not really that good. It's not that strong, and it's due to the lack of reading. Also, what what I've done before is I used English. I learned words in English, and then I translated them to German to make sure that I know the word in German. And if I didn't, then I write that down in my head, and so on and so forth. I remember I was watching something. I don't watch TV much, but I was watching something with my mom, and she was watching the previews, and this word came up, and the word was ebullient, and we looked at each other and we were asking ourselves, okay, what does that word mean? And the first thing that came to my mind is, what does that word mean in German? So of course I looked it up, and now I have it in German, and so you can do it that way. Go from your language to a different language that you are learning, and learn it that way. Hold on, get something here. So after Ebullient, I was at a bookstore and I picked up this book. Over 3,000 words every person should be able to use, and a few that you probably shouldn't. The big book of words you should know. In this book, it's all in English with just a bunch of words, random words, and I use the word. I flip through and I look up each word in English or in German, and I write it down, and that's another way I learned German. Um, 3,000 words, so can't go wrong. But I think that's all for the video. I have 10 seconds. I hope I answered your question, and anyone else who has questions, just shoot me a comment or an email, and I will see you soon. Ciao.